Okay. Okay, so Mark, I'm going to hand over to you now. Is that okay?
Yep, thanks, Anne. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our panel session today on IBioIC's Bioeconomy Day, which falls in the middle of what is very exciting for us, which is Scotland's Bioeconomy Week, the first for Scotland and the first for the UK as well. So hopefully you're having a good week and managing to participate with in as many of the activities as possible. The key driver for this activity was really to celebrate the work that's been undertaken to grow the bioeconomy opportunity for Scotland, but also to think about where the opportunities lie to continue growing and where we can work to deliver the jobs and the societal benefit that we're in place to do. For those of you that maybe aren't so familiar with IBioIC, the acronym stands for Industrial Biotechnology Innovation Centre, and we're one of 7 innovation centres covering a range of topics that are seen as key to Scotland's success for growth. And when we were originally established in 2014, we were part of the green aspects of the chemical industry. Since then, of course, circular economy and the bioeconomy has really taken off, and particularly in Scotland, we've been working very hard with partners, some of whom are on the panel today, I'm delighted to see. We've really grown our network and our activity to support innovation. Now, IBioIC supports the growth of the bioeconomy broadly across all sectors, and we're very happy to work with as many of you as have an interest in the space to look at where bio-based and sustainable processes can be brought to bear for societal and also environmental benefit. Having said that, the important aspect for all of us, of course, is stability, supply chain resilience, and economic growth on Scotland's economy and wider. So we're going to touch on a lot of the topics that we work very closely with a number of partners on. So as an innovation organisation, we help form collaborations between academia and business to business as well. And in fact, over 130 of those have been in place, which has leveraged a follow-on funding of over £40 million from those organisations as well. And we are passionate about skills and the future skills of what's required to really to deliver the successful bioeconomy that we envisage. For those of you maybe less familiar, I would point you to the recent refresh of the National Plan for Industrial Biotechnology that IBioIC delivered in the middle of the year. And it's interesting to see that already we've delivered most of the targets and are moving towards stretch targets. So positive times, but still lots to do. And I'm delighted to see as many of our colleagues and friends that we work with on the panel today, and I'm sure we'll have a lively discussion. And on that note, I would like to introduce your chair for the session today. I have the pleasure of working with Anne Glover, who's the chair of the IBioIC Governing Board. Many of you will also know her as Special Advisor to the Principal at University of Strathclyde and previously President of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. So Anne is passionate about bioeconomy, and I'm sure she's going to get the most out of our panel participants today. And so I'll hand over to Anne to run the panel today.
Okay, Mark, thanks very much for that, and welcome to everyone who's joined us today. And I'll just say as a housekeeping, you can put any questions that you've got in the Q&A box, and we'll try and come to those. But just to give you a flavour of how we'll run this, we've got about 5 different sections in the event this afternoon, and so I'm going to introduce each section. We'll have a 5-minute slot or so from who's ever heading up that section, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion and so on. And I'd like to echo Mark's points. Success is there for the taking for us in the bioeconomy in Scotland, because we have every bit of the jigsaw, and in fact, some of it in more abundance than most people would hope for. We really are, and I know I'm an optimistic sort of person, but it's hard not to be optimistic looking at this, because I think we almost are in the best place in the world to be able to deliver a future economy based around sustainability and that bioeconomy piece. So that's what we've got in the grasp of our hands. Today's a discussion about what we need to do more of, how we can work together, and where we can get to. So I'll come to each kind of panelist in turn, but first of all, it's a real pleasure to welcome Mr. Ivan Mckee. Many of you, and I think almost all of you, will have either come across or met Mr. Mckee. He's a tremendous supporter of the Industrial Biotech Innovation Centre, and we're very grateful for that, because it allows, if you like, our voice to be heard in partnership with government to see how we can work together. Just for background, I mean, Mr. Mckee is the Minister for Business, Trade, Tourism and Enterprise, which I'd have to say is quite a big portfolio. And just again, as a little bit of background, Mr. Mckee's background is a degree in manufacturing science and engineering from University of Strathclyde, so I'm very happy with that, of course, and has worked in business across the UK, but as well as internationally. So very much understanding of the environment in which we all work. So welcome, Mr. Mckee, and can I pass over to you for a few introductory remarks from you?
Yeah, thanks very much, Anne, and thanks, Mark, for the introduction, and thanks for being able to talk with you on the call this afternoon. So I'm looking forward to the discussion, and it's great that we're having the first ever Bioeconomy Week Scotland. And I think this kind of looks and feels like one of those events that will grow from this to become significantly larger in future years, I've no doubt, because the comments you made there, Anne, about Scotland's positioning in this sector, I certainly believe that, and it's great to hear it from people who absolutely know what they're talking about, that we're very much got those advantages to build on. So it's certainly one of a number of sectors where Scotland enjoys some tremendous advantages and real potential that we need to work together to build on across industry, agencies, academia, government, and everybody to deliver on that. And I know that's absolutely the journey that we're all on. The natural resources we've got, the talent, the academic institutions, the creativity, the business base is of huge value, and the opportunities to decarbonise existing sectors that are already in Scotland is a huge part of that as well. And IBioIC very much sits at the heart of all of those efforts and able to pull things together. And it's not just me that's saying that. Scottish Government recognises industrial biotechnology as a key industry for the future in Scotland's economy, which mentioned in the National Strategy for Economic Transformation and in our investment plan. And as we're pulling together our innovation strategy, it will get due reference as well. And I think that'll be a really interesting platform for us to go forward. The things we're going to put in innovation strategy in terms of how we further accelerate joining things up and building on the great strengths we've got. Since we launched the National Strategy for Economic Transformation, I've been engaging with programme of meeting with businesses, roundtables, events, and doing that right across, right through the summer. Had the pleasure of visiting SAMS, the Scottish Association for Marine Science, up in Oban, which is one of those real hidden gems that we have in Scotland's innovation ecosystem, and it was tremendous to see the world-leading research and facilities and expertise that resides there. I was also down in Dumfries and Galloway, and much of the work that's happening there is of course related to the sector, and building on Scotland's food and drink expertise, and also visited the DSM down in Ayrshire and saw at first hand the work they're doing to take forward methane reducing additives for cattle feed. So all very good stuff, and great to see it. Also spoke with the Scottish Bioeconomy Council meeting in September. So that's that I think really talks to where the government's coming from a policy perspective and the importance we place on the sector. The National Plan for Industrial Biotechnology, which of course we refreshed in June of this year, identifies the policy aims and the actions we're taking forward together, government, Scottish Enterprise, other agencies, IBioIC and others. These include the career aspects of this, so making lifelong careers in industrial biotechnology more attractive to help address skills challenges that we all face across all sectors in the economy at the moment, enhancing public understanding and acceptance of industrial biotechnology, which I think is a key aspect. To be honest, it's a sector that we need to do more work to explain to people what it is all about and what it can deliver, both in economic terms, but also very much, of course, as part of our net zero transition and the other contributions it can make to biodiversity and environmental challenges. And I think that's a real open door there that we need to work to further develop. And also the strategy looks at what we need to do to increase investment into the sector to help those embryonic businesses to grow, to scale, and do what they can on the world stage. Government's also bringing forward the Circular Economy Bill and the Waste Route Map, which I know we'll be discussing later on this afternoon, to enable us to take forward a zero waste and circular economy. And again, industrial biotechnology got a huge role to play there. And I'd also like to highlight the government's £5 million CO2 utilisation challenge fund, which is now live on the Scottish Enterprise website to help companies develop technology around about commercial uses for CO2. So quite a bit going on, but events like this are hugely valuable for myself and government officials and others to hear what the whole sector is thinking and how we can further work together to take forward this very important, ambitious, but very realisable agenda that we're all part of. So thanks very much.
And thank you very much. So in this sort of session, we're thinking about policy and government. And one of the big challenges we probably have when we're introducing new technologies is almost to have a policy ready environment, you know, to be able to take the innovations and to make sure that with all the proper safeguards and so on, that we're able to do the translation. So is there anything more? Well, I mean, from your perspective within government, what's the biggest, I suppose, challenge to you in being able to take new technologies and then to ensure that we have the right policy framework to be able to move forward? Is communication good enough, or do we need to do more in that area?
I think that I mentioned public engagement. I think that's an important part of it. I think that's something we all need to work together on. I think in terms of what happens within government, understanding what the sector is working on, and if there's going to be challenges there in terms of adoption or regulation or policy that we need to address, having those identified early enough to be able to explain and then take forward what we need to do is important. So I think that talks to the very strong relationship that already exists, but making sure we leverage that to make government aware of what's coming down the track and how we work together on that, and looking for opportunities to be able to also project this on the world stage, because I know it's a stereotype, but it's very true. In Scotland, we're good at doing things, but not so good at telling people about it. So it's important that we project it on the world stage, which is not just from an expert point of view, from an investment point of view, from a talent attraction point of view, from a cooperation point of view on research as well is very important.
Yeah, I mean, because you're sort of central to all of this, do you think, I mean, Scotland's a small country, And so we should be well connected. And what's your view as a government minister when you look around and you think, is business well connected to academia? Are they both well connected to government? How do you think we've got room for improvement? What's your thoughts?
We've always got room for improvement, but to be honest, I think that we're in good shape. I think compared to other places, I think that we do that well. It's something that gets relentlessly fed back to me from inward investors and others who are looking at Scotland and looking at the attraction of Scotland. I mean, I was at the Interface event last night at Heriot Watt in the National Robotarium, which is a fabulous asset we've now got there. And Interface, of course, their role is to work on strengthening the links between academia and business across a whole range of sectors. So that was real testament to the work that we're doing in the ecosystem to develop on that. And one of the companies that was there came up to me afterwards, inward investor, moved their business to Scotland, didn't do so because we gave them the most money. Others were offering them more money, but came here because they recognised that we had that ecosystem and that connectivity across business, academia and government, and that was hugely important to them developing their business. So I think it's true that we do have strengths there, but we always need to do more to develop it and bring more businesses into the loop.
Yeah. So I suppose just I know if any of the panel have any other questions, just put your hand up. But just one last question, and this I think for me is a difficult one. We've left the European Union, but the European Union are thinking about new policies and how they deal with particularly a lot of the biotech stuff around gene editing and so on. And is there an openness for Scottish Government to look at what might be possible there? Because I'm thinking of the biggest issues around food security, climate change and so on in the biotech area. And I think that there's going to be scope for huge investments in those areas, particularly with gene editing technology as opposed to genetic modification. But that's always been a difficult issue for Scottish Government. In fairness, because I think most Scottish people are thinking, well, I don't want GM technology, but then you don't often know what the benefits would be if you had it. So have you got any thoughts around that, or could you tell us some of the thinking?
Yeah, I'm not, well, in terms of in general, clearly we are minded to look at the evidence base on any developments, but I think as a point of principle, we are minded to stay aligned as best we can with the EU, and therefore we closely monitor what the developments within the European framework are on these issues, and that I think gives us some helpful guidance. But I think government is open for that conversation to understand what the technologies can offer and what the safeguards need to be in place and what the challenges might be, and have a conversation on that. But as I say, we're also watching very closely what's happening on the EU position developing on that issue and others. Okay,
thanks. That's helpful. And okay, so the last opportunity for you then, have you got an ask of us? Have you got something? And I'm thinking not just the Industrial Biotech Innovation Centre, but I mean, we do get substantial public funding. So our purpose is to accelerate the ambition of Scotland's bioeconomy. But colleagues who will be on the call here and on the panel, have you got any ask for us, what you would like us to do to be able to meet your objectives of a growing economy in Scotland?
Yeah, well, I think be ambitious is one. I think continue the commitment to working closely with the government and the rest of the ecosystem to take forward that agenda. And I think that's working well. Engage with other sectors is always helpful. It's remarkable how much we can learn from other sectors that are going through similar challenges in the economy, and often opportunities to cooperate that perhaps aren't at first obvious. And I think in terms of working with government direction around about inclusion, diversity, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because it very much helps to address some of the skills challenges that that we're all very, very conscious of. So I think there's a few bits and pieces there, but to be honest, I don't think there's any of that isn't already happening. We just need to do more of it.
Okay, right. Well, I've taken a note of those things, so we know what our challenge is, but I think we've got off to a great start. Thank you very much, Mr. Mckee, for that. And I think you're going to continue to stay with us during our session this afternoon, so there'll be more questions, I'm sure. Thank you very much. So we've then looked at the kind of initial starting point for this event of looking at government and policy. And what we want to do then is move on, and it moves on very naturally from what we've been talking about into companies and private investment. So you can have the great ideas, you can have some of the background technology and facilities, but you need funding to meet that ambition that the Minister was just encouraging us to have more of. So I'm going to then go over to, we've got Jim Laird, who's the Chief Executive of Enough. So a very good example of a kind of biotech company, which has had a very rapid trajectory in terms of success. So we can hear a bit about that. And also Sarah Hardy. So Sarah is the Director of new investments at Archangels, because in order to be able to do anything, you need investment and funding. But sometimes that's not easy. Sometimes there are challenges in getting that funding. So I'm going to hand over. And Sarah, are you going first, or is Jim going first?
I don't mind.
You go first, Sarah, as you're
unmuted. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the kind invite to participate today, and thanks to the organisers for having me. As Anne said, yes, I'm part of Archangels. We're a business angel syndicate. We're slightly unusual in terms that we invest in early stage technology, life sciences companies based here in Scotland. So we're looking for disruptive IP, something protectable, something that's hard for the competition to replicate. But lots of it, we're therapeutic and sector agnostic, but lots of areas of the bioeconomy going forward are cover many angles. So we're very supportive, and we think actually lots of solutions that are coming haven't been invented yet, and we see lots of scope for us to engage. So, and I think it's important for Mr. Mckee to realise, we're an angel syndicate. Over the last 30 years, we have created over 5,000 highly skilled jobs in the Scottish economy and contributed 1.4 billion to the GVA, to the economy. So it just shows that actually working in early stage can help provide that aspect. So that's my bit I wanted to say before we start.
Okay, thanks for that, Sarah. And Jim, do you want to make some introductory remarks?
Yeah, thank you, and thanks, Mark. Thanks, Anne. I'm the CEO of Enough. We are a biotech company, and I think we all celebrate that biotech is the most efficient means of making many ingredients. And for Enough, it's about making food protein. We date back to our technology dated back to technology that was developed in the University of Strathclyde, so the alma mater of many on the call, and it led to the creation of an entity in 2015. And then we developed our technology initially in IBioIC's shared access facilities. So I think that role of policy, role of government in giving a shoe up to innovation is exemplified by the support that we got through IBioIC and others. Growing from that base, we've since raised quite significant capital, and later this year, or maybe in about 6 weeks' time, we anticipate that we'll have our first production at our first manufacturing facility, and that's a facility which is located in the Netherlands, where we'll co-locate on a cargo facility. And we believe that in the fullness of time, that becomes the world's largest protein facility, protein of any nature. As a Scottish company, our R&D team is located in Glasgow, and this team will lead our growth into what we see as additional territories. And I think it's important that biotech addresses global markets, and that's where we've got a great capability in Scotland and IBioIC that enables innovation, but it ultimately gets deployed in many markets outside of Scotland as well. I think as you suggested, biotech addresses some of those issues of food security, sustainability, and I've got a very loud truck in the background. And we are supported in that journey by both policy and government and by investors. And I think biotech's renowned for it's an expensive it's an expensive game of installing large capital. But I think Sarah exemplifies enough was lucky to have early support from angel investors in Scotland, and then moving it up into, we were supported by a larger fund, and then we completed we referred to as a Series B 42 million euro round last year, and without capital, we don't make that transition to scale. And so I think that combination of policy and government and investors is certainly what enables biotech to move from being an idea and an innovation into being something that can have impact at scale.
Yeah. So just if I follow on then, Jim, immediately after you, I'm thinking about what the biggest challenges are in that scale up. So one of the things that IBioIC can offer our members and others is that we have some scale up infrastructure, which is based at Heriot-Watt University. And that allows people to take ideas from the lab through into the first start of that commercialization development and de-risk it, so that people like Sarah can look at it and think, okay, so things are going in the right direction. But it's quite a modest facility. Do we need bigger facilities like that in Scotland, or is that not something that was a limiting factor for you?
I think without that first step, then you would never get breakthrough. So I think we're grateful for what's there. And I think what IBioIC has created is ecosystem. So it's not just the bioreactor and the facility to have a steam line that will keep that clean. It's also the network of everything from investors to advisors to academic strength. And I guess certainly for the benefit of enough, one of the things we've had is a pool of talent that comes out of the IBioIC MSc scheme, which creates that talent, which is the livelihood of any SME. So I think we could put out shouts for larger infrastructure, but I think it's making sure the ecosystem is amenable to support. And then I think we all stand on the shoulders of giants and of each other. I think the investors will make biotech inevitable. I think the role of government is to ensure that it's conducive to where are we most attractive. And Scotland is attractive, but I think there's other areas, Canada, Israel, Holland, Singapore, West Coast US, are other areas where they exemplify it's a competitive environment. So I think it's that dual aspect of investors and the ecosystem enabled by policy and by government.
Okay, that's really helpful. So if you think then, Sarah, about the investment environment, what's your biggest headache, if you like, in terms of your day job in being able to invest for the future?
Well, I think, some of it, just comments on that with what we've just discussed. I think different areas of some of the bioeconomy, what we're investing in, some of it has naturally, you can de-risk it a certain amount, but the next bit to scale up and get proof of principle, you're then talking a very large capex, and then you need some sort of specialty investors. And they are seeing movement there. People like SNIB will be really useful. I think there's some really positive changes there, but you do need that ecosystem where you've got a proof of principle and then where next. So more we can do in terms of harmonizing the regulatory environment. I totally agree with Jim. I think we're getting that ecosystem now. There's lots of small biotechs, which peer-to-peer learning, sharing, you see it in the ecosystem. Scott Bio, MyAlgae, they're all sharing and they're all helping. And that brings investors inwards as well. And we're seeing more specialist investors coming to Scotland, which is all very positive. So I think that there is things out with your control, and that's things like an investor ultimately looks at price. You've got to work out ultimately if the business model means that you're waiting on regulation for that price. Things like mandating net zero or mandating things will help that price, and new innovation will help bring the cost of goods down for some of these things, whereby prices, it does make it a very unattractive investment for an investor. Yeah. But that talent pool, I think, is improving, which is a big thing, which I think is fantastic. And actually, maybe COVID has taught us quite a few things. We can look further afield. We've looked at being resilient in terms of when Ukraine hit, we couldn't get some feedstocks, we couldn't get certain fertilizers, you couldn't get certain semiconductors for your analysis in your bioreactors. There's things that we've learned. We're becoming more focused on what we have to do at home.
Okay, that's interesting. And both you and Jim have mentioned a lot around skills. And Jen, I hope you're listening to this, because we're going to come to you at the end to talk about skills. But I mean, it's a key issue. Again, an area where I think we've got tremendous strength in Scotland, but we could be doing things slightly differently. You know, we could. I suppose it's hard to be truly innovative if you don't behave innovatively yourself and underpin that. So I think we'll come back to that. But is there enough money around, Sarah? I'm just thinking you primarily look at small companies.
I think there's lots of early stage ideas. There's loads of money there, and I think they can get to quite a considerable stage. I think for me, the gap is not at the sub 5 million. I think there's a gap between, and maybe this is mandated by the changes in the market conditions we're seeing globally at the moment. There's a reticence, and there's a gap to me between that 5 to 10 or 10 to 20, because the US VCs are focusing currently on their current pipelines. We can get to a certain scale, but if you want to grow, you've got to make that choice, stay in Scotland and or you end up selling out. So I think there is a bit of a risk just now. And Jim, maybe if there'd been more money around at the time, you might have done things differently. But to me, we can get companies de-risk from a certain level, but there is that, if we had money from government for building a manufacturing facility or co-locating to make it more environmentally friendly, people would set up here and not be going straight to the US.
Okay, I mean, just Jim, for a final word for you, do you recognize what Sarah's saying? Might you have done things differently if you'd had more investment coming through from Scotland?
I think I'll come back to biotech's a global market, and therefore within what we do, we will manufacture. If we're successful with the technology, it should be manufacturing in Scotland, and it should be manufacturing in other locations as well, local to the local feed crops. Scotland's got Grangemouth as a heritage example of a large-scale biorefinery and infrastructure, which gives a platform which should be competitive globally. I think is there enough money question comes in as to the sort of thing we've just seen from Biden in terms of stimulating the bioeconomy in the US, says that they will compete very, very hard and very, very aggressively, and it will pull opportunities and other investments there, which otherwise would not have gone there. And I think I think there is money out there, but it's playing in a global landscape, and therefore we're competing against. Scotland's competing in that global landscape, and innovation will end up where the money is. And that money, I think, will be the combination of private investor money, which I think is not constrained in the long term, and the stimulus from policy to go alongside of it. Okay,
that's really helpful.
I think there's lots of, for good ideas, there's lots of money out there for early stage ideas. I think there's some great opportunities in Scotland. I think they still get funded if they're competitive.
Okay, that's optimistic. So thank you for that. So we're looking at that private investment and companies piece, but you have to invest in something. So it needs to be good ideas. There needs to be a strong foundation, and also a lot of problem solving going on in the background, you know, as people develop the new ideas and enter that kind of innovation landscape. So I'd like to move on to our next section, sort of looking at that academic environment. I mean, we're incredibly strong in Scotland in terms of the impact of our research. And most of you will have heard me say this before, but something that I think we could be enormously proud of is that, you know, the impact of our research in Scotland relative to our GDP is #1 in the world. You know, and that's an independent analysis. You just don't get better than that. So we've got an awful lot of good stuff. So with that, I'd like to pass over to actually one of our board members of IBioIC, Professor Derek Stewart from the James Hutton Institute. So Derek, how are we doing as far as generating that research and then moving it through the pipeline?
I would suggest we're doing well. I think we're punching well above our weight, given that we've had, I would argue, 4 catastrophic conditions. So you've got the geopolitical thing, the Ukraine war, that's restricted food or calories to 500 million people, essentially, has disappeared. You've got the problems with Brexit, you've got the energy costs, and then you've got the silent danger, which kind of like one of these 70s information films, of climate change that people are not really aware of. But actually, if we don't address this, you can forget about worrying about anything else, because everything is going to collapse. So I would say the science in some areas is a lot of science is running to stand still. But I think certainly in areas like the food systems that's contributing 20 to 40% greenhouse gas emissions globally, is accelerating at a hell of a rate, and biotech's helping to do that. Going back to what Ivan said earlier about communications, there's an interesting piece there that people are probably not aware that Scotland has the biggest single product industry that's biotech based. It's whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got the biotech from the barley and you've got the biotech from the yeast. And I think that message is a nice opener to introducing biotech to the masses and seeing the benefits. Of course, you've also got most of the cheese that's sold's got GM rennet in it as well, globally. So people are already eating that, that they're not aware of. I mean, that's kind of GM by stealth, but let's not go into that. But the opportunity, so a good example of where the food systems are using green biotech is working. I always like to look at what people think the next big trends are. And the Forbes magazine is always a good identifier. So it's identified things like agricultural biotech's huge. And remember, that's playing into a global market. That's 4% of global GDP. That's what agriculture is. You don't get bigger single sectors. And even if you took a 0.000% slice of that in an economic basis, it's enormous. You've got environmental biotech. So whether it's degrading plastics, creating new plastics, or systems to remediate poor land. Personalized medicine. So the Canadians, and actually work we're doing here, James Hutton Institute with the Morden on vaccines, using plants as vehicles, molecular factories to create new vaccines, things like that. And that's a really cheap way of doing things. It doesn't involve huge amounts of steel. And actually taking that forward, it's maybe where we need sectors to cross over. So if Scotland's a land of renewable energy and increasing renewable energy, the footprint on a product equivalent should be far better here. So instead of just innovating and then shipping it off, we can maybe innovate and make it here. We can probably make it at a cheaper energy cost, maybe, if we link it into areas that are creating renewable energy. So the cross-sectoral learnings, I think, have to start to get better along those lines. Yeah, I mean, I think it's hugely advantageous. Also, even without growing it, we produce 27 million tons roughly a year of biomass that's not that well used. So that's a great chemical feedstock for biotechnology to get its molecular teeth into, to create energy, chemicals, pharma, food, ingredients, cosmetics. So the potential we've got in Scotland is huge. It's interesting on a scale size, we're small enough to be a demonstrator for the world, but big enough to be a commercial runner as well. And I don't think we flex that muscle well enough.
Yeah, I mean, I like what you're saying there, because I've always thought, I mean, if you look at things like medicine and clinical trialing and so on in Scotland, I always think we're kind of the Goldilocks country.
Yeah. Because,
you know, we've got all the different pieces together that allow us to do something very significant. So big enough, but not too big, that, you know, that things get lost. So it's interesting. You're raising agricultural biotechnology, Derek, and there's a question in the Q&A box. I think primarily it was directed at you, Mr. Mckee, but I think it's quite useful just to hear your perspective, Derek, about, you know, is the agricultural industry too conservative to get them interested in biotech? Do we need to do more of a job in highlighting where they could increase the value of what they do?
I think like any industry, you will have early adopters. The middle tranche will then follow them. Then there'll be a group at the bottom that will continue to do what they've always done. But it's actually, as the age is changing in the industry, they're becoming much more open and adoptive to new practices. I think the point is you don't go in and hit them with science first of all. It's the business piece that needs to be addressed to them, because farmers are businessmen. They're always interested in something new, but they need to know what the business case around potentially may be. And I think going in that sort of two-handed manner is the way to do it. So a good example of that is matching green biotech with things like vertical farming, where I've chatted to lots of different farmers. Once they come in, they get it. And then the next questions are, how much is it and when can I get one? Yeah. So that doesn't demonstrate a reluctance to take innovation on at all. And you've seen the proliferation of anaerobic digestion systems. across Scottish agriculture, there's another biotech application. So I think the appetite's there if you get your pitch or your introduction correct.
Okay, and you mentioned something else that I would just like to make a bit of emphasis on, because I think it's significant, and that is, you talked about, you know, if we thought about, and in fact, Mr. Mckee, you talked about this as well, the fact that we've got a lot of natural resources in Scotland, but we've got a huge amount of Europe's renewable energy resource. So in terms of looking forward for sustainable energy and sustainable manufacturing systems, we've got a tremendous asset there, as well as having the biotech, the bio-innovation, the bioeconomy piece as well. And I'm trying to think, I don't know what you think, Derek. I can't think of another country that's got quite the mix that we do there. And, you know, as long as we retain that international competitiveness in our research environment.
You're probably seeing it's the smaller equivalents, like, not smaller, same size, Norway, Denmark. They've got these mixed energy economies, particularly Denmark. And they've got a lot of their renewable energy that's feeding into, or is fed from to a degree, the agricultural systems. So you've got a huge pig industry that's creating slurry, it's creating anaerobic digestion, it's feeding energy into systems. So you're right, there's almost like a population size sweet spot to work on, and I think we're in it, but are not showing muscle, I think.
Okay, so maybe the opportunity there is to have a bit more attention around that and have a kind of roadmap about how you would develop, you know, in partnership with around renewable energy, sustainability, and waste, etc., and biotech.
Yeah, it's kind of like a resources nexus we need to develop, I would say.
Okay, so good. It's always good to have a challenge then. So, if then we're thinking about our research environment, you've heard a bit about that. So if we just move on to the kind of next piece, if you like, and it's around that circular bioeconomy. It's what we've been talking about all along, but it's to be able to be successful in terms of growing the economy, smart jobs, you know, protecting the environment, all of these things, but doing it in a way that doesn't negatively damage our environment, and that requires that circular bioeconomy. So at this stage then, I'd like to introduce from Zero Waste Scotland, William Clark. William, it's good to have you with us. So can you talk to us a bit about that circular economy and where the big opportunities are?
Absolutely, and thank you. Thank you to the organisers today as well. So I'm William Clark. I'm a biologist and I work for Zero Waste Scotland. So our organisation really exists to lead Scotland to use products and resources more responsibly, focusing on where we can have the greatest impact on climate change. And we work across the whole economy, and I'm just going to, so you've got the material economy, all the hard stuff, and then you've got the bioeconomy sits off to the side of it. And for me, I would like to pick up off the back of Derek and his 27 million tonnes of resources. So for us as Zero Waste Scotland, I think there's a number of things that we and the other people on this call in the audience are working on that are relevant to this conversation. So Scotland is a food and drink nation. Our products are second to none, and for me that means our co-products are second to none, and we need to see the value in that 27 million tonnes. So with a view to identifying what it is, where it is, and how to start addressing it, Zero Waste Scotland, IBioIC and other partners mapped out the risings in Scotland and arrived at that 27 million tonnes. 16.7 million tonnes of that is based on agriculture. It's not all food waste, quite a lot of that is food loss or additional materials that have been generated as part of the production of food that aren't valued in the same way. So cereal straw might be a good example. So the biorefining potential report for Scotland allows people to have a look at the resources in Scotland and really target their thinking and their activity where the resources that they're interested in really matter. So it gives us a benchmark to work from off the back of that in terms of measuring these developments and understanding the changes that we're making. There's also the circularity gap report. So that just allows us to measure how much material is actually cycled within the Scottish economy. But there's a couple of examples that I would really want to bring to the discussion. And for me, this is really, transforming the food system to meet the climate mitigation, food security, all of the important things that we're talking about today, will require development and implementation of a range of systemic approaches and technologies. And the work that we're doing with IBioIC is a great example. So one of the projects we're doing, the Whiskey Cascade project, is a perfect example of the circular bioeconomy. So there's underutilised co-products come out from whiskey, and we have collaborated with the Scottish Whisky Research Institute and Horizon Proteins, myalgae, and biopower technologies. So zero waste is possible. The circular economy is the way to do it. We can take all of the gaseous output from a distillery, so the CO2, we can take the solid outputs and the liquid outputs, and by working with these technologies, which optimize each stage of the process for the next technology in line, we can produce the whiskey, but then we can also produce a high-valued protein for use in animal feeds. So we're moving away from input dependency. We've actually got a renewable feed and it's optimized for that use. Omega-3, which was my previous life, we can use the microalgae to generate omega-3, which can again be fed through into humans or animals and has a significant benefit in terms of the health and welfare and improved performance of the system. And then with the biopower technologies, we can take all the residuals that are left over of those processes and feed them back in as low carbon, low cost energy into the distillery. So by working with particular industrial biotechnologies and then by working across networks of those technologies, we can actually arrive at zero waste businesses.
Okay, so there seems to me that, you know, what you're talking about there is a significant opportunity, but, you know, as we introduce the circular economy bill in Scotland, and that will be mandatory reporting of food surpluses and waste across Scotland. And a lot of businesses and others will see that as, you know, yet another thing that I have to do. So how do we change that easily into an opportunity rather than, you know, if you like, an obligation, which just takes more of my time if I'm a business? How do we easily do that?
Yeah, for me, it comes back to the definition of waste. So it's only a waste if you've made a product and you have co-products that come from that you have no purpose for. So increasingly, we know where the problem is. We're starting to identify all of these industrial biotechnology solutions. It's getting everybody joined up in the middle. And that's why events like this and Bioeconomy Week are so important, because it brings the whole community together into a format where we can share these ideas, we can develop common languages around about sustainability, and we can identify the mechanisms, the levers that we need to pull to really advance sustainability in Scotland. So it gives us room to open up. You know, food production comes with a sad truth. There are negative externalities. This is how we achieve our future ambition going towards 2030 without also increasing those impacts that we see through the food system. So Scottish farmers have done so much work over the years. They're doing good. We can be doing great, and it's these kind of technologies that we need. Everything that we're talking about, all of the different technologies, work alongside agriculture. So we're not replacing the activities, we're just adding value to them. So that, you know, once all of this starts to work, once we identify the silver bullet, there's no such thing as food waste. It's all co-products or resources or substrates that are going to be fed through into another process.
Okay, so I mean, a lot of that is around the communication piece again, and we maybe need to think about how we communicate differently and who we communicate to, because if I think just we're talking biotechnology and industrial biotechnology, that's our lifeblood in IBioIC, but often when you talk about that, it sounds like something quite nasty, you know, industrial biotechnology. People don't immediately warm to the sound of that. So, and I like very much Derek's, you know, we've got the whiskey industry, that is biotechnology, and been doing it for years, you know, baking and brewing, you name it. But I think, I mean, maybe I'll just leave this one out there, but we need to think a bit more imaginatively about how we communicate and to whom we communicate, because it doesn't just matter by, you know, we can communicate to farmers, but the people who are, I suppose, on the buying end of the farmers' products, they need to be, you know, demanding that sustainable product and byproducts and things. So I leave it out there because I think it's a significant challenge, because it's easy to say we need to communicate more, but, you know, people are sort of communicated out in many ways, and it's thinking, you know, how can we most easily do that? So yeah, I'd be delighted if people have got ideas around that.
I think you've got age stratification on the messaging there. So my son's 28, and his awareness of this was way beyond anything I would have been at 28. I mean, obviously things have moved on, but his mode of buying is bringing sustainability in as part of a judgment call now.
Yeah, and actually that's a really good point. I mean, I think, well, for many of us when we were young, you talked about being a consumer or something like that, whereas now I think people are more thinking about that they're users. So you use something temporarily and then it's moved on. And I think that's a much better way of thinking about it, but it requires a substantial change in not just one section of the whole ecosystem, but an integrated one across the whole piece. But okay, William, you've given us a fair bit to think about there, and it's also really good to hear about the projects that you have, not just with IBioIC, but with our other colleagues and members of, well, indeed, members of IBioIC, but universities and so on as well. So we come back, I mean, Jen, we've been talking a lot about skills and the need for new skills across the piece in being able to deliver a kind of a future successful bioeconomy. So I want to, can I hand over to you as one of the founders of Fuel Change, and tell us a bit about what we need to do around skills, where we're getting it right, where we have some big challenges.
Okie doke. I mean, from the off, I feel very positively about skills and people. I think there are some things that we could do better, and I'll come on to that. But actually, I think we have, since we're talking about food and baking, we've got all the right ingredients. We just maybe need to put them together in a different way. So I work with Fuel Change, and there we believe that truly engaging the next generation is fundamental actually to a positive transition to net zero. And there's, I suppose, two words in there that I want to pick up on for this skills piece is true engagement. And I think when we're talking about the next generation, the next workforce that's coming through, you know, in the work that we've been doing over the last couple of years, I don't think we lean into that generation enough. And I don't think we are supporting them enough. And quite frankly, there is a bit of a gungy layer, which has always existed in businesses, you know, that are keeping that back. And I think that's one of the things that I think we need to really reach down into, because, you know, Derek was absolutely right. The consequences of climate change are coming, whether we like it or not. And it's up to us to decide whether that transition to net zero is going to be positive or if it's going to be one that hits us really, really hard. And I think businesses are struggling at the moment in some aspects. You know, there's a number of things that they are struggling with. And one of the things they're struggling with is talent and skills in people, and have been probably for the last 18 months. So, but I think if we look to the next generation and we actually unleash some of their hidden talents and their hidden skills, and that's what we've been doing in Fuel Change, then you can actually get some absolutely fantastic results that come through, and you can develop your own talent within your organization. And I think perhaps we're guilty of the fear of missing out, of somebody's got something better over there. And actually, I think we need to start looking much more to what we have within Scotland and grow and develop our own. And one of the, you know, we've been working with IBioIC since we started 2.5 years ago, and I've been really lucky to work with this group of people from even before that. And one of the things that I think IBioIC does really well is that they have got a fantastic skills program for the next generation, and it isn't just university focused. So it's actually about taking students in colleges who are doing really interesting technical work and pulling them through, and then where appropriate into industry or appropriate into further education. So I think you guys in IBioIC have actually got it right, and you've been putting a lot of resources and time into that, and it's paying dividends. But just one last thing I'd love to say, Anne, is, you know, I know that there's some skills week stuff going on at the moment, and there's discussion around green jobs and green skills. And you know, when we were talking about this before, I think that there isn't, you know, why are we searching for this mythical future green job or green skill? The skills we need are the ones that we need right now. Why would we be waiting to employ them? So we need to be getting better at teaching and practicing resilience and critical thinking and problem solving. And those skills, doesn't matter if you're really in biotech or if you're looking at a net zero solution or if you're trying to figure out an oil and gas or renewables problem. See if we create opportunities where those skills are absolutely core to what we do, then the technical aspect can be overlaid on top. And I think that's where we need to have that focus. And we need to have that focus all the way back into secondary schools and take it forward into the workplace.
Okay, so Jen, do you think we need to rethink you know, what we've considered as traditional education and things like that, where, you know, your school, college, university or whatever? And because so many people go into the workforce and they're involved in a particular job that is satisfying and rewarding for them. But then, you know, because of other events or other technologies that come along, they are not appropriately skilled to make the jump into another area. And it's very hard to reskill. So do we need to think, you know, we always tend to think of qualifications, you know, wherever they are, rather than skills. And so do we need to think about how it's, you know, I don't know if it's just a description term, but do we need to think about people saying, yeah, well, I've got the module in critical thinking or whatever. I'm being a bit simplistic here, but rather than have a degree or have to do this, and something you can do when you're with your employer.
Mm-hmm. So I think there's a couple of things there, Anne, and I really agree with you actually. So I think what we've been doing in Fuel Change is a program that lasts over 16 weeks. And that wasn't by design, that was absolutely by luck. But actually, when you do something that is little and often, and that is enough to get people interested, then actually when you whet their appetite, then there's more that they can do there. And I think, so what we've been looking at is around those aspects and those skills. And I think, so we're working in schools and we're working in colleges and in businesses. And actually, one of the things that's interesting from schools is people are spending time for themselves getting a certificate or a qualification. And you do that in college and university. And then you move into the world of work. And actually, you're working in a team in the majority of cases. And the success of your business is dependent usually on more than just you. And I think there's aspects there that we're not doing the transition into the workplace well enough. And I think that's where actually, because Scotland is very small, there's opportunities there to just join those things together. And it strikes me that actually to demystify biotechnology, because I said to somebody else, oh, I'm coming on this webinar today, and they made a face, and I was like, no, this is amazing. This is, you know, the future. This isn't a face. This is opportunity. And I think we need to talk about it more. We need to be less Scottish and a little bit more celebratory, and actually just look at the fundamentals. And I think that's what you were saying there, is what are the building blocks, and then add to it.
Okay, I'm going to come to you in a minute, Jim, to ask you about how easy it was for you as you grew the business to get skilled people. But just whilst you're thinking about the answer to that one, it's interesting again what you talk about. It's almost the historical way that we've thought of the labour market and jobs and so on. And we have an opportunity to do something differently. And I was at it's actually a renewable energy type technology company, and they're doing very, very well, about 300 employees. But when they engage on projects, so within the whole company, let me start at that level, there's obviously a chief executive, so there's somebody right at the top, but nobody else has titles. And I found that initially a wee bit of a challenge, thinking, okay, you're in a company with 300 people, but nobody's got a title, but there is a financially responsible officer at the top, you know. And they talked about the projects that they did. They would get, you know, half a dozen people together to do a project, but the person leading the project might be the new graduate employee that's just been barely 4 weeks in the company. And that they are there and they are supported. They've got a mentor who's done a project delivery before, and then everybody else has a different role. So they really appreciate that teamwork that you're talking about. So, you know, I think that there's another big challenge in getting us, I think to deliver innovation, you yourself have to be innovative, and that's part of it, is thinking actually we can do things differently and it's often better. But Jim, was it a challenge to get the right people at the right time?
Well, first of all, thank you for giving me time to think of my answer. Much appreciated. I think, Sarah, every investor we've ever spoken to have said that the team is everything that counts. They can invest in an A team with a B idea, beats a B team with an A idea. And so I think we can't spend enough time on the team. And therefore we're looking for all the skills that you've just talked about, and teamwork and capabilities and creativity. I think that the reality of the capability comes, it's a bit like the gold rush. Nobody could dig for gold, but actually when there's a gold rush, everyone found a spade. And I think if we can create the environment where there's not just the incubator that's creating the SME, and the SME is creating the larger scale organization, where there's all that way through, then I think talent will find its way there and will create itself. And so I think our job for talent is making sure that we can keep on pulling it all the way through, and we're not just that we break through into scale, such that person who's not got a job title anymore but who's got great problem solving skills can emerge into the next thing and the next thing, and therefore create the great team that creates scale and impact. So I don't think I've answered your question, but I think that's for me what captures where we'll have to go and look for talent. And if we are the most exciting thing, if the bioeconomy is the most exciting, is the gold rush, then the talent will come into that area. And so our job is to make it the most, Scotland's heritage of the Northeast created this pool of talent into the offshore industry, and it wasn't because of, and it was because I suppose it was a semi-gold rush. Now, within your specific question of have we found all the talent that we want, the answer is no. There's still going to be it's a competitive market, and we will go externally when necessary. And we're 55 people with 17 nationalities, so we've had to go externally, and we've found talent from all sources, and embrace the visa systems and other things to bring them in to be able to work in the south side of Glasgow at the right time. So I think it's a competitive market. We will always be competing with. It's not. I like the idea that whiskey is the original part of the bioeconomy, and so therefore there are some latent skills, and that's good, and that helps us. But actually, we are competing with electric vehicles and other areas which could look more interesting and more exciting. And if you take that sector, then parts of Scandinavia, parts of the west coast of the US are all becoming the megavolt factories. We'll actually come back to, can we take our Scottish role from beyond the SME into let's get us into the manufacturing scale, because at that sense we'll have that pathway where we don't dissipate that talent, and the talent can see its journey all the way through.
Yeah, so you're right, because you need to see a future. You need to see that it's not just one job that I've got in front of me, but once I get started in that job, there's another 10 have appeared that that would be good for me, and that's quite an attractive option. So I'm just, for colleagues who are joining the webinar, who've joined our webinar, there's questions that can go in the Q&A, and I'm looking for those at the moment. I'm going to go actually back to you, Mr. Mckee, with one of those questions, but just keep the questions coming in if you like. We've got another 10 minutes to do a Q&A before we kind of wrap up. But there's one question in here saying, how do we make sure that we stay nimble in terms of regulation, making sure that regulation protects us and the environment whilst not limiting innovation? I mean, actually, Mr. Mckee, that's quite a big ask to be, it's like the precautionary principle, but in practice, how do you do that?
Yes, isn't it just? Well, I think there's a number of layers to that. And initially, when you think regulation, it's a problem for business, it's a negative. And some of regulation, obviously, there's a very, very good reason, be it on the environment, be it on employment practices or whatever it happens to be. I think at that level, it's important to keep a dialogue open so the government is aware of what the implications of regulation is. And to be honest, if there's opportunity to simplify regulation, then of course, without losing the impact and the effect of what it's trying to protect or deliver, then of course we're interested in having that conversation. So I think that's at one level quite important. But I think regulation is probably more complex than that in terms of its effect, because if we use regulation to shape an environment that's then conducive to emerging sectors, and that can be from a simple level of how we're able to leverage public sector procurement because of how we design and regulate things, or it could be creating a whole industry. And if you look at industrial biotechnology, I mean, it is an industry that's built on the fact largely that we're moving towards a net zero, sustainable, biodiverse economy, and trying to protect those that biodiversity and so on. So regulations that promote, protect and encourage that, you got to believe are going to be helpful for the sector and give it a space to grow that might otherwise not be there. So I think we've got to look at this both as what are the defensive aspects, but what are the offensive aspects of this as well? And I kind of sometimes describe it as using regulation as a competitive weapon. So I think thinking through in that sense is an important part of the picture.
Okay, that's really helpful, because I think we do need to think kind of right up front, you know, when we get new technologies and things coming through, you need to think, well, you know, how would you use them? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? And then thinking who needs to be part of the thinking to come up with smart policy and regulation, because it's not always who you think. So that's a very good steer for us. So I'm going to ask one of the questions here from Ian Archer. And so Ian is a colleague at IBioIC. And he's asked the question, and I'm not sure who I'm going to ask to answer this, so I'll wait until I ask the question. But how far do we think we are from creating a self-sustaining and exponentially growing industrial biotech cluster in Scotland? And I would almost say that's Ian talking about turkeys voting for Christmas here when it comes to IBioIC, because I think if you've got a self-sustaining industrial biotech sector in Scotland, we've done our job. But there might still be things that you would need an overarching organisation to do. But who should I come to? Derek, what do you think about that? Do you think?
It's not an easy one. I mean, I think it's getting over that hurdle of a lot of the stuff that IB going forward will need to produce are fossil fuel equivalent products. So the one way to give that a boost, and it maybe goes back to Ivan's or UK government bit, is to create either a carrot for that area or a tax for the other area. So you'll get some sort of credit for at least initially. And once actually people transition to that, that becomes the norm. And the other thing you can theoretically penalise quite heavily because you want to diminish it. So it's the sustainability of the industry rather than sustainability I was talking about earlier on is always going to be the hardest part. What will come with that, I think, will be, and I think Kim's mentioned something about that in the questions, is the public awareness piece. If you're shifting to a biological, bio-derived thing, don't shy away from the negatives. So the negatives may be, actually initially, it may cost a wee bit more. But the benefits are, and it could be carbon footprint, environmental benefits. You have to be absolutely open and honest, because if there's the slightest hint of hiding stuff, you're dead because it will come out.
Yeah. So actually, let's go on to that question, Derek. So this is Kim Cameron asking the question about thinking about the communication and public awareness piece. In the US, they have the program called the Bio-Preferred program, where you have the kind of the labeling of products and services. And that supports the bioeconomy and promotes the purchase of bio-based goods and services. So it's something a bit like, I don't know, a kite mark for safety for things historically, or, you know, organically farmed agricultural products. People can look for that logo. But is there the possibility of doing something like this in Scotland? And actually, Mr. Mckee, you might be our first port of call here, but is that something we could do in Scotland, you know, in terms of our devolved responsibilities, that we could, you know, things could be labelled and promoted in Scotland as bio-preferred or our equivalent?
Much of that will be reserved, but it's a complex area. So I think we'd want to step through it carefully and understand what was and what wasn't possible. But it's certainly, yeah, I mean, someone would be interested in having a look at if that was felt to be of benefit, and understand what the scope there was for that, because there'll be UK restrictions on that and international restrictions on it as well, depending on what it is exactly we wanted to do there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Mark, is it too mean to come to you and ask you, would you like to see your job being obsolete?
Not just yet, if at all possible, but in the near future, yeah. But you know, we've got great traction at the minute, and the opportunities are there. I think William correctly identified that it is incredibly complex building in a circular economy. It requires a lot of base knowledge. You know, we are an innovation centre, so we get excited about the wonderful science and the ability to translate it and work with business at the cutting edge. What I think we need to remember as well is that there's a lot that needs to be done in simple terms to give us an opportunity to realise and valorise some of these feedstocks or waste streams. So things like even sorting of domestic waste, you know, how can we sort it so that it comes into more usable form and so on. So there are some things, it's a bit like when people talk about the future wonders of artificial intelligence in manufacturing, they forget there's an awful lot of data manipulation and number crunching that takes a long time to do before the exciting bit can happen. So hand in hand with government and other partners, I think we can go forward with that opportunity. I think the passion is there. The pieces are there, as you identified, Anne. I would like to see us go beyond the targets set, even the stretch targets for the national plan for IB for 25. And where are we going there? Our ambition must certainly be exponential in terms of what we believe the growth opportunity is. And, you know, we've heard opinions from a range of different areas today. So, so yes, I'm happy to sit in this seat for another while longer to make sure that we can drive that on. And also to recognise the fact that the team work really tirelessly and are passionate about this area as well, you know, and form great partnerships and build opportunities on a daily basis. So I am confident that we will certainly deliver the targets, but equally it would be great to see some real manufacturing, put some footprint down in Scotland of the scale that Jim's talking about, you know, and really build that cluster. And I suspect it will take an existing cluster to help drive that, such as, you know, Grangemouth or the Northeast, for example.
Yeah. And actually one of the big things that we benefit from, I mean, in Scotland, we've got 7 innovation centres, we're one of them. But, you know, I know that the innovation centres at your level, Mark, will all interact with each other on a frequent basis and talk about what's happening. So that's a connectedness and another ecosystem. But we know in our Industrial Biotech Innovation Centre, one of the big issues or opportunities, if you like, is around data. And so we've got, you know, the data labs as a big innovation centre, and there's a huge opportunity in terms of biotechnology and data, you know, working together in a lot of the systems, etc., that we would operate on a commercial manufacturing basis. And I know that without naming companies, but a major pharmaceutical company based in the UK who's a member of IBioIC, I was asking our members what keeps them awake at night. And he said data. I'm always terrified that in my processes, you know, biotech processes, I'm generating data, and I think there's a lot of value in there, and I'm nervous that I'm not mining that value. So it's another example of where we can work across the piece, ourselves with data labs, and then looking at that manufacturing and what we can do in order to make that significant difference and, you know, be more transformational in terms of the economy in Scotland. So, okay, I'm looking at our time and we're just, I'm got a couple more questions, I think, in here. Okay, so one question that I'm going to ask then is, it said, in response to the question about regulation, it's also important to recognise the role UK and international standards play as a flexible and responsive alternative to regulation. So, you know, standards other than just regulation. Does the panel have any thoughts on this? So looking at, you know, international standards as part of the ecosystem. I'm going to look for volunteers on that one. I don't know who. Yeah, Derek, thanks.
Maybe got an example of this. So I'll go back to maybe kind of slightly off topic a wee bit, vertical farming. So realistically, you could class that as organic, but it's not in soil, so you can't class that as organic. So the UK groups are trying to pull together to create certification that probably the rest of the world will then adopt. And to be brutally honest, the standards that come out of the UK are very well accepted globally. So we've got the chance to set standards in there. So whether in the areas of biotech, you create standards / certification. It's what you want. Standards are all seeing, all doing. Certification kind of is a selling tool, to be brutally honest, and it keeps, as someone described it, the riffraff out. And guarantees a better quality of product. So I think we probably want to go down both routes on this to a degree. But the biotech, we probably need to exceed that we are not the biggest players. So the standards routes may be what we want to do rather than certification. But Mark may be a better one to maybe comment on what I've just said.
Mark, have you anything to add on that one?
I think that it's a fair comment. I think, I mean, the UK as a whole, its regulatory agencies have been well respected in being forward-looking but also robust, and so I think we're in a good environment. But I think the dialogue between users, developers, whatever, and the regulatory bodies, that dialogue needs to improve in terms of how we communicate and how regularly we communicate on particular topics to educate. And it is an education process. We saw that with MHRA and the vaccine. You know, they were very willing to accept conversations and evidence which would not normally have perhaps been acceptable because of the circumstances, but yet was still found to be scientifically robust. Yeah. So I think, you know, as scientists and business people, have to appreciate the importance of being able to communicate effectively how robust our position is on things.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So I think we've had a very good and quite a far-reaching discussion, and I thank the panel members very much for that, and for the audience for putting in your questions. And just as I'm going to kind of round up with some final thoughts, I'd like to mention a project that I think almost typifies where the opportunities lie for me that IBioIC and Edinburgh University are engaged on, and that is and a manufacturing company called Prickly Thistle. So this is interestingly reported in The Guardian. So they did a big piece on this, and it wasn't pushed by us. We in Scotland have a lot of hill sheep, which are very robust, can stay out all year long, and they graze on land that is otherwise not used for anything. But the fleece from those hill sheep is almost a cost rather than, if you like, any potential profit, because they're sheared and they're often just put to landfill because the wool is very coarse, because those sheep can stay out all year long. But what IBioIC and Edinburgh University together are doing is looking at how that wool can be treated with enzymes to turn it into the same quality as fine merino or cashmere, most of which at the moment we import from China and elsewhere. This is an absolutely fantastic example for me of industrial biotechnology that people can look at, see the value of, that you're taking a product that is waste and you're converting it into something very attractive and high value. And that's the essence of what industrial biotech can do. And so the opportunities are almost endless, because you wouldn't immediately have seen that as an opportunity. But we've got an awful lot of the, if you like, the biomaterial here in Scotland, and that's technology that can be exported elsewhere as well. So it's, you know, echoing William's point about taking that kind of waste and not seeing it as waste, but just seeing it as opportunity. So I think, you know, that there's our challenge. There's that we're only limited by our own imagination. And yet we know, because we have countless examples of where that can then be translated, not just into economy, but into attractive high value jobs, which is something we would want, and fair, you know, looking at fair employment as well. And it also does look at that equality and diversity piece, because, you know, this is an industry that any can be involved in, and that we're doing the, if you like, the training, thinking about the skills, that's going on hand in hand with the technology as it develops. So I think just finally, I'm going to give the final word to Mark, just to so he can say a few words about engaging with IBioIC, because, you know, we have all the evidence that it makes the difference. But before I do that, just the final piece is some messages. We do need to talk about this more, and I would be very interested in hearing people's ideas about, you know, how can we communicate in a less traditional way, you know, where we just talk at people and expect them to listen and absorb what we say. So we need to think about how we do that differently. I liked very much what the Minister said to us about the government is very minded to look at evidence. There are pragmatic reasons for staying aligned with EU regulations, but, you know, also looking at international standards and so on. But to be pushing and to be ambitious, I think the Minister said to us, as a sector, he welcomes ambition and wants to see ambition. And I think that if we can demonstrate that, then I would hope the Minister would welcome us knocking on his door and saying, okay, we are ambitious, here's what we've got. How can we work with you to do this? And it isn't always asking for funding. It's sometimes asking for guidance about, you know, how we navigate through regulation, where our partners might best be, or even knowing, you know, in terms of things like programme for government, knowing what's coming down the line so that we can get ready to jump on the train as it passes the platform. You know, that's the industry that we would want to be part of. We also heard that IBioIC has created a significant ecosystem, and, you know, it's done that not exactly from a standing start, but we have achieved a huge amount in the, if you like, the 2 phases of the Innovation Centre. And so despite the fact that I was being a bit mischievous about, you know, saying, do you want to see yourself out of a job, Mark? There will always be a job, because we need an organisation such as IBioIC to think about the next technology, the next de-risking, so that Sarah and her colleagues can say, yeah, I'm happy to invest in that, or to bring in other investors, because you've got the appropriate infrastructure to allow this to be de-risked. This is the best place to do it. So you always need that. You need people thinking about the skills, the MSc students and so on that have been mentioned. And to have that bringing together across a very broad range, if we look at our membership, a very broad range of national, international companies, a lot of SMEs, a lot of large multinationals, and we can act almost as a marriage broker between them. And our very successful annual conference allows people to do just that, where they can do, you know, effectively, I'm around, it's a peculiar terminology I'm using, but to do that kind of speed dating, and also to get investor advice and things like that that are just hard, particularly for SMEs to do. So, and we heard from Derek, our science is good. We are competitive internationally. And that food and drink nation piece is something that we should talk about. And I think finally, when I'm thinking about you, Jim, and your business, very successful business, and absolutely tackling that future sustainability. But because, if you like, you still have R&D in Scotland, although you're doing some international manufacturing, that of course makes Enough, the company, a real ambassador for what happens in Scotland. So, you know, so there is an advantage. And we have to think about this a lot in IBioIC, because we lose our staff a lot to go to companies who are members and so on, who spot our staff and think they're great, we'll offer them a job and pull them over. And yeah, that does give us a headache. But on the other hand, it gives us a lot of network right across the companies that we support. So I'm going to leave it there. I am tremendously grateful for everybody's time on the panel. There's a fair bit of food for thought there. And Mark, I'm going to hand over to you just for the last comment, if there's anything you'd like to say.
That's only because you're not used to me being this quiet.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks to everybody for a really healthy conversation on the main pillars of things we feel passionate about and how we grow the bioeconomy. I guess from our perspective, we recognize every organization that we work with or partner with is different, and so we flex accordingly as to where you are in your journey and how we can support you. So you know, we can help with innovation funding, with networking, joining up the pieces, you know, working with partners like Zero Waste Scotland. You know, we can link up where you can source materials and so on. But wider than that, I think, you know, it's getting engaged and be part of this. This is what Bioeconomy Week Scotland was about. It was about being able to show and demonstrate where we've arrived at currently, but where our ambition actually sits. And I think we've heard today, we do have a significant ambition to grow this even further. I mean, in terms of, you heard Jim mention about the scale-up centres. If you feel that you need support with proof of process or any technical input into maybe what a process looks like, of course, get in touch with us. We're very happy to look at that. And there's still project funding available that will co-fund alongside you if you want, if you're an academic and want to look for a business, you know, to work closely with, and you're a business looking to access some of the scientific expertise that's part of the network, then of course do contact us. And really, apart from that, I think it's, you know, hopefully everyone has felt the passion and our need to drive the bioeconomy. I know we've heard this mentioned a few times today, but let's be absolutely clear about this. There is no plan B in terms of where we need to get to for net zero. So we proactively need to grow this and work together. And if we're truly going to build a circular economy, that requires a lot of trust and deep knowledge. And hopefully we're a few steps down that path, but still a long way to go. And we're hopeful that the opportunity is there for Scotland and wider. And IBioIC are very pleased to be helping catalyse that. So I would just say thanks for everyone for their attention and also the participation on the panel, and especially you, Anne, for driving the questioning today. Thank you.
Thank you, and bye everyone, and bye to everyone online.